Waves by C. Don McCallum. Chapter 5. The stars dangled in the sky like fruits of light under the canopy of the night sky. Mia stared at the pinhole lights and wondered if someone was looking in. She lay down on the road outside her tent and watched the twinkling with the rocky world at her back. There had to be more to the world than this place, this tiny village. If this was all there was, who would tend the orchard when the world swallowed all the people and the few remaining walls crushed in on them? Taking a deep breath, the cool air felt good in her nose and lungs. She felt awake, even though she knew she was dreaming. That was the only explanation for the calmness she felt, and the fact that when she squinted her eyes tightly, she could see Perla in a star that seemed to hover right over the old village square. Coming to her feet, she walked towards her sister's smile. Night faded, and the light of day filled the world around her as she stood in front of the old fountain. It was the beginning of the warming season of the tree, and the village's walls stood intact. Its people listened to the girl speaking at the side of the fountain. Mia sat on the edge of the fountain and looked at her reflection in the water. She could barely hear the story her sister told. Jealousy stopped up her ears. She could feel the people around her, smiling. Everyone loved Perla. Mia was the loud one, the one with the busy hands who ran through the village without a care in the world. No one ever listened to what she had to say. Perla's words became as meaningless as the sound of the water shooting up and out of the fountain. The story made as much sense as the world when it opens and closes under her feet. Mia watched the ripples bounce to the edge of the fountain, and she looked into her own eyes. Only they were different than how she remembered them. Perla has softer eyes, the villagers always said. The eyes she saw were not how she remembered hers to look. The eyes looking up at her were Perla's. Those eyes will never grow older, Mia thought, looking at her sister's reflection in the water, the reflection that should have been her own. Time will never weigh down her skin or make it wrinkle and sag. Her mouth will never turn down from the sadness of this world. Perla was free, and Mia wished she could have gone along. Lost in what she saw in the ripples, she saw the mouth on the water spoke. Perla's voice, that the villagers always said was sweeter than Mia's, echoed in her head. "Come home," the voice said. Suddenly Mia wanted to plunge into the water and wrap her arms around the girl she saw there. "I'm sorry," she wanted to cry. Even though she knew it was a dream, she still didn't want the villagers to know about all the terrible things she'd done. "I'm sorry for stealing the storybook. I'm sorry for wanting to take Jerlaine from you." Her sister's kind eyes looked at her with love as she spoke again. "I can't be just Perla anymore. That's not my name." And Perla smiled. "Mia and Perla, that's my name." "Perla, how do I get to you? How?" Mia cried aloud. She didn't care about the people around the fountain anymore. She just wanted to get to her sister. A low grumble rose up from deep in the world's belly, and the image on the surface of the water shook. Perla's smile faded, and the world quaked as the villagers braced themselves. Seeing her sister's image fade, tears streamed from Mia's eyes and made the water ripple. The sky cracked open and night poured out into the blue sky. Darkness overtook the village and the walls disintegrated. The villagers dissolved into the ground as the tree uprooted itself, yanked the fountain from the square, and ran off into the night. Alone and afraid, Mia stood on the throbbing ground, her legs unsteady. The pinhole lights of the stars freckled the sky. She looked around her. She looked under her feet. The field lay all around her. This was no dream, not any more. She was awake and standing in the trembling field. As quickly as it began, the world stopped its grumbling. But her knees kept shaking, and her chest felt like it was going to rip open like the ground did sometimes during a quake. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't take a step. All she could do was to try to keep standing and try to keep her knees from buckling under her. The mouth of the world had called her name in the night. The voice sounded just like her sister's, but the grumbling of the world's belly wouldn't let her go. There was more for her to do yet. There were things she needed to say, things she needed to do. "Mia, it's all right," Jerlang yelled, coming to her side. You're safe, he said, putting his hands on her shoulders to stop them from shaking. Where were you? Her voice erupted from her throat. You were supposed to be watching. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. I was looking out at the field 1 minute. The quake came, and when it was over, you were in the middle of the field. I don't believe you, she cried, looking into his eyes. Their color was lost in the dark night. You fell asleep. You were supposed to be watching, and you fell asleep. You don't believe that, Mia. I would never do that. I promise. His words were hollow as the dead logs in the wilderness. Still shaking and suddenly very cold, she freed herself from his hands and walked back to the tent village. He followed. Why did you bring the storybook back to me? She threw her words back over her shoulder. I couldn't do it. You were right not to put it in the rubble. No one would believe it anyway. She turned and glared at him. It was too dark to see his eyes, to see if there was some sign of a lie there. Why didn't you keep it? Why did you have to sneak into my tent? It's safer with you. She couldn't stand the thought of having the book anymore. It was just a reminder of everything that she did wrong, everything that she destroyed. What if someone finds it now? She asked, whispering now. She could hear the tents wavering in the wind. People sleepily straightened tent poles and went back in for the rest of the night. Mencha's been watching me every second of the day. You know that. Tell her I made you keep it. Spinning around, she stood still. If anything was making her shake now, it was anger. She waited for him to catch up to her. How many more lies are you going to tell, Jerlaine? I'm just trying to protect you, he said. His voice was soft, but Mia wasn't going to let him stop her from saying what she needed to say. Like just now in the field, if that quake hadn't come and woke me up, then where would I be now? This time he had nothing to say. In the tent village, she heard her mother crying. She had to get to her. She had to tell her she was still alive. Knowing she might not have the nerve later, she asked him the question that weighed down on her since she could remember. How do you feel about me, Jerlaine? Do you care about me at all? Of course I do, he said. You're my friend. Her mother's cries were muffled. Mia could hear Mencha trying to soothe her, but she couldn't feel anything. All emotion had drained from her body. She was as empty as the broken fountain. She withered like the tree. Everything crumbled. Is this what the quaking world saved her for? So she could be torn down at last like the old walls of the village. She wished she'd found the mouth of the world. She wished she hadn't awoken. But the mouth had spoken her name. It would happen again. Soon, Mia thought. Soon. Her feet moved to the sound of her mother's sobs. Jerlaine followed, but she didn't care. Judging by the location of the stars, there were still a few hours of night left, so they were making their ways back to sleep. Mia knew she had a scared look in her eye. Why else would the villagers who were still outside look away from her like they did? No one asked where she was coming from. Mia reached for her tent flap, but it flung aside before she could get her hands on it. Mencha stood sneering in the doorway. Seema, Mencha called to the woman behind her, your daughter has decided to come home. Entering the tent, Mia felt the flap close behind her and heard the old woman walk slowly back to her tent. Seema lifted her face from her hands and the lamplight showed her red eyes. Mia was ready for the questions. Where were you? Why would you make me worry like that? She was ready for the screaming. She was ready to be thrown on the ground. She wasn't ready for the soft, quiet voice that rose from her mother. My heart is already broken, Mia. Seema sat cross-legged on her pallet, her body calming from the surging chaos of a moment ago before her remaining daughter walked back into life. My shoulders are burdened enough already. I can't worry about you too. Mia tried to match her mother's voice, the calmness of it, but her uncooperative breath wobbled. Don't you even want to know where I was just now? Don't you want to know what happened? So you can tell me a story that you and Jerlaine made up in the night. Why should I believe it, Mia? But you believe Mencha? Mencha was like a mother to me when I was growing up. You know that. That doesn't mean she's telling the truth. Why would she lie? Why would I? Mia walked to the center of the tent. The lamp's flame flickered and seemed to ignore their anger. Because of what you've been doing. Which is what? What have I been doing, Mother? Mia saw the words lock up in her mother's mouth. The words didn't come, only silence. I want you to stay away from him. You know that he was for Perla anyway, and Mother, Perla is dead. She couldn't control her voice any more as it flooded the tent. Seema slammed her hands on her ears. Her chest heaved as she fell flat on her pillows, sobbing. Mia tried to lower her voice, but there was too much anger behind her words. Perla is dead, she screamed. I am alive. She couldn't think about the pain her mother was feeling. All she knew was everything she'd been keeping inside the past 2 seasons, the past 13 years, rushed fast like the river, full of an unseen world. You've lived your life. You've had a family. Now a new river was flowing as tears poured down Mia's cheeks. What do I have? Mia stopped talking, but her body shook. She wondered if her mother had even heard a word she said. She should have spoken louder, but only a whisper came now. Do you even want to know where I was? Seema didn't answer. Do you care that I woke up in the field just now, the mouth of the world calling my name? Why didn't her mother say anything? Or is that what you want? Seema was quiet. Her face down on her pillow, she took a deep breath and eased herself back up to sitting. A strange calmness filled her now, as if nothing had happened, as if no cutting words had just been said. Seema looked at Mia and said, Mencha is going to stay here at night. The calm spread to Mia. She didn't know why or how, but it did. She should be yelling at this news right now. She should be gathering up her things and heading for the wilderness. But Mia was calm. The familiar sound of the villagers walking on the pebbles filled up the road outside. It was later than she'd thought. Maybe she'd read the stars wrong. Maybe the sky had shifted too without her noticing. That was the way things were happening lately. Whatever was happening, there was one thing that she couldn't deny. She would have to pull herself together. Mia knew she was out of control. She couldn't stop Jerlaine from lying. She couldn't make Mencha leave her alone. She couldn't keep the world from shaking, and the mouth would still call the names of the villagers at night. There was nothing she could do about any of these things. All Mia could do, the only thing in the whole world that she had any control over was herself and how she dealt with the chaos that kept popping up at her from all sides. The calm inside of her, whatever its source, felt good. Seema stood and Mia almost relaxed completely. This woman standing in front of her was the only thing that mattered. Mia looked into her mother's eyes and saw the face hers might become if the world didn't call her name again tonight or ever. The eyes were tired and tears hid just below the surface of them, but the strength in those eyes swirled around in the deep brown. Seema blew down into the lamp and silenced the flame. The sun would give the light they needed for the rest of the day, Mia thought, taking her mother's hand. It was time to go to the fountain, just like they always did. Thank you for listening to Chapter 5 of Waves by C. Don McCallum. If you're enjoying this story, please consider sharing it with someone you know. And please like the video and subscribe to this channel to help others discover these stories.